Welcome to Waypoints, the podcast of fly fishing travel. With helpful travel tips, news and events, destination profiles, great stories, and expert advice from seasoned and experienced traveling anglers, this is your backstage pass to the world of fishing travel. Waypoints is fueled by adventure and brought to you by Yellow Dog Flyfishing, a hands-on specialty travel and booking company that delivers the industry's very best insider knowledge, logistical support, and trip preparation. Freshwater or saltwater, international or domestic, Yellow Dog has you covered. And now your host, Yellow Dog founder and director, Jim Klug.
C.J. Box is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of 27 novels and the creator of the Joe Pickett series, one of the greatest collections of mystery fiction stories ever written. As a Joe Pickett addict and a huge fan, I am beyond excited to finally have CJ on the show, a great way to celebrate our 25th episode of the Waypoints podcast. Over the years, CJ has collected all sorts of awards for his writing, including the Edgar Allan Poe Award for Best Novel in 2009, the 2016 Western Heritage Award for Literature from the National Cowboy Museum, and the Spur Award from the Western Writers of America for Best Contemporary Novel. CJ's books have been translated into 30 languages, and over 10 million copies have been sold in the U.S. and abroad. And along with being a hell of a writer, CJ is also a dedicated and longtime fly fisherman, an angler who is equally at home wading the trout waters of his native Wyoming, fishing for roosterfish in Baja, or chasing bonefish and tarpon throughout the Caribbean. CJ, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, it's really my pleasure. I do quite a few interviews, but this is the first one I've ever done that has fishing as at least a part of it. So I'm excited about that.
Well,
Thank you.
It's second nature for you, so this will be an easy one.
We'll see.
Well, how have things been in Wyoming? Have you been getting out on the water at all lately?
I have. I live in southern Wyoming, south central Wyoming, on a little ranch, and to be very brutally honest, my life hasn't changed very much at all. The only thing that's really happened since the pandemic got started is my calendar has been wiped clean of trips, and at least the last week of the book tour. So that has made me, it's resulted in me being about as productive as I've ever been in my entire life. But we just, social distancing is kind of a part of life here where, we can barely see one neighbor from where we live. And I've been fishing, the rivers are starting to come up now, darn it, but been out 3 or 4 times in the last couple of weeks, and it's been very good.
Nice. Well, we're up here in Montana and Wyoming, Montana. We're some of the lucky ones for sure when it comes to making it through these weird times.
Oh, I agree. I have adult children in other parts of the country, and they're all trapped under stay-at-home orders, and really kind of suffering through all of this. And every time we talk to them, I know I drive them crazy by just saying, well, I can't see anything much different really from here.
Life is good in the West, that's for sure.
That's right.
Well, I want to talk to you obviously about fishing and your background there, but of course I have to talk to you about your day job as well. And
sure.
You are arguably the most popular modern day author for readers that love to fish and hunt and spend time outdoors. I mean, you've accumulated a huge following of anglers, hunters, and outdoorsmen. Well,
and that's something I really appreciate. When I first got started, this would have been, over 20 years ago now when the first book came out called Open Season. The protagonist was the game warden, Joe Pickett. Therefore, most of the books take place outside, and because he's a game warden, they involve hunting and fishing and outdoor pursuits and natural resource issues and other things. But I didn't know when I first got started if there was much of an audience out there for these kind of books at all. There were very few like that at the time. There's a few more now, I'm happy to say. But, I hear constantly from anglers and hunters and just outdoor people that they found the books one way or the other and that they appreciate them. And I appreciate that too, because I think it's one of those things where there's a lot more readers interested in outdoor, activities than publishers realize. And these books are and the success of these books is kind of a testament to that.
Well, for sure. And, we're going to talk a lot about Joe Pickett because he's obviously got some huge fans in the fly fishing world. But before you wrote your first Pickett book in 2001, you were a journalist and a small town newspaper guy at that. What is it about a journalism background that seems to produce so many of America's great authors? I mean, you can go down the list: Twain, Capote, Hemingway, Defoe. I mean, all these great writers got their start as journalists, and that was some of your early years as well.
Oh, absolutely, they were. In fact, when I first came up with the idea of what later turned into Open Season, I was working for a little weekly newspaper in Saratoga, Wyoming, called the Saratoga Sun. I think I hear from fledgling writers out there all the time, with asking, how could they do it? How could they get published, et cetera? And I always steer them towards journalism and away from organized creative writing programs. And this makes some of the creative writing people quite, angry with me. But what I see as a reader is I tend to find myself, when I really find an author that I really like, I tend to find out that they have some kind of journalism background. And I think that's because their training, to work in a small town newspaper in Wyoming or Montana means you're involved in everything. You're writing features on the 4-H cow that somebody bought on a ranch. And I was able to, interview and talk to just about everybody in all walks of life. And get involved in kind of some grungy stuff that later turned out to be great training. But also that means you have to write on a deadline and you have to get to the point in order to keep going, because generally these newspapers are understaffed and kind of overworked. So it's good training to get to the point. There's not much difference between a great opening line in a novel and a great lead in a feature story. So I think it's training and also exposure to other parts of life other than the bubble of creative writing and universities and so on. So you can write about real things, a little bit about a lot of subjects. And still to this day, when I'm researching a book, if it's set in a different location or if it's has a topic that I'm not that familiar with, I put on my old reporter's hat and go interview people and try to go there and do those things and talk to the experts on both sides of the issues, so that I can put those things in the books and have them come across as authentic.
Well, it clearly shows in the many books you put out. And, while we're a fly fishing and travel podcast largely, we've done a number of episodes that talk specifically about great travel writing. And I love to ask our guests about their favorite authors, what they're reading. Tell us a little bit about some of the authors that you love and have influenced your work and perhaps inspired some of your writing.
Sure, there's so many of them. Right up at the top, I always put Thomas McGuane. Of course, lives in Montana.
Oh, yeah.
And is my favorite novelist and stylist. But he's also written books of essays on horses, and one I love that's hard to find these days called An Outside Chance, about hunting and bird hunting and climbing and elk hunting, and then The Longest Silence, which is all fishing essays, and they're great. And so I'm a big fan of his, but also Wallace Stegner, Cormac McCarthy, Flannery O'Connor. In the genre, kind of in the mystery crime genre, I'm a fan of Michael Connolly, and I'm reading a John Sanford book right now. Denise Mina is another name I really like. But I try to read really widely, not just I read literary fiction, I read popular fiction, I read nonfiction, I read essays, I read environmental stuff, and I read kind of like a predator to learn things and pull things out and hopefully get better at writing as I do. But early on, A.B. Guthrie was a big influence.
Oh yeah, The Big Sky is a classic.
Yeah, I just love those books. And a lot of the cowboys, those kind of contemporary. No, they weren't contemporary Western, but they were revisionist Western novels that I really love. True Grit, that kind of thing. But I never read a book about a game warden, and that protagonist came around. The reason he's the protagonist was because that first book was primarily about the endangered species law and how it applies on the ground in the real world. And the best protagonist for that story was a game warden. And I didn't ever plan to write a series at all. The first book was called Joe Pickett. So, in my mind, it was going to be a one-off. But when it finally, after, 20 years of writing it and 4 years of trying to get it placed somewhere, when Penguin Putnam decided to publish it, they offered a contract for 2 more books at that time with Joe Pickett. So that's how the series got started.
Well, 20 years ago, when you gave him open season, introduced the world to Joe Pickett, did you ever imagine how popular a Wyoming game warden could be?
Never. I make jokes about it when I'm on the road. I tell a crowd, I always knew everybody out there was just waiting for a Wyoming game warden series, and I was the only guy who could bring it to them. But that's not true. No, I had no idea. I had just hoped at the time that it would be well received within the Rocky Mountain region, that people would read it and think, the characters and the settings and the culture was authentic. That was really my goal. I was surprised it was classified as a mystery, and I was very surprised that it won more Best First Novel awards than any novel to date in kind of in the mystery crime genre. So that was all the shock.
Well, I think a lot of our listeners, CJ, are familiar with your work, but for those that have yet to read a CJ Box or Joe Pickett novel, how would you describe the series? And more importantly, how would you describe Joe as the protagonist in these stories?
Well, Joe Pickett is very much kind of an everyman in a way. Unlike a lot of protagonists in mystery or crime series, he's not the fastest gun. He doesn't necessarily beat anybody up. He screws up a lot. He's a state employee. He dotes on his wife and 3 daughters, so he's a family man. But his life as a game warden gets him involved in a lot of things outside just enforcing game and fish regulations. In the first few books, I'd say he was pretty naive and really made some errors. And since then, since the books take place in real time, he's gotten a little more cynical and a little more bitter about things at certain times. But I think most people see him as very empathetic, that he's very much like people they know or even the reader themselves, and that the things that happen to him could happen to anybody. So I think that's been a lot of the appeal. That's what I hear. And that he's just very much different than the average, private investigator or detective or whatever in a lot of these kind of books. The fact that there's, it's all set in the outdoors is also different. Although since then, I'm happy to say there have been lots of other writers who have taken that on and written fishing and hunting and outdoor kinds of books. But at the time, I think I was about it.
Well, 20 books in, more than 10 million books and counting. People love Joe Pickett. And my father, who's not a huge outdoorsman, he's read every single book. He's a huge Joe Pickett fan. And it's pretty funny, even, with my kids, they've heard me talk about him for so long that our latest dog that we just got, of course, a yellow lab, we named the lab Daisy after Joe's dog in the book.
I love that. Yeah, Daisy's in the next room right now. I love to hear that. That's fantastic.
Well, is Joe, or when you wrote the first book, Open Season, did you base Joe on an actual person or anyone that you knew or still know in Wyoming, or was he just kind of a compilation that came together with the story?
More like a compilation. I've met quite a few game wardens around in the Mountain West who Joe Pickett could be based on. But at the time I wrote the character, it was more just kind of in my mind, just kind of a Western, a Western icon, a kind of a typical Western man, and who's competent in the things he does, but not super competent and not super tough. One thing I never thought about it at the time, but I think I was on the book tour for the third book, and I had an email on my website that said, I'm just paraphrasing, I read this, it was from a woman, I read this book because it was recommended to me. Joe Pickett reminds me so much of my father. And she went on to list all the attributes of kind of strong and silent and Western, and it was like you were channeling my father when you wrote this book, and it was written by Gary Cooper's only daughter. At the time, she's in New York, and she felt somehow I was channeling Gary Cooper into the subject, into the character of Joe Pickett, because he grew up in Helena, Montana. And I guess I never was really thinking of Gary Cooper, but I wasn't going to argue with her about that because I think he kind of personifies the kind of person I'm talking about.
That's a pretty cool compliment for sure.
Yeah, I got the chance to meet with her, and she told me about, growing up, going bird hunting with her dad and Ernest Hemingway in Idaho, and meeting all these people, and it was pretty fascinating.
And I think Gary Cooper grew up in Bozeman, didn't he? He's a Wyoming or Montana guy?
I believe. He might have been in Bozeman as well, but I know that his birthplace, at least, is listed as Helena.
Nice. Well, good history there. Well, I think no doubt Joe has hands down become one of the most famous Wyomingites and certainly the most well-known game warden in the world. As Joe has evolved through your books, you've obviously been able to spend a lot of time with real-life game wardens in the state, and I got to think you're probably a pretty big deal with this crowd. You've got to, you've made their department famous all over the world, and I'm wondering if they now have a giant photo of CJ Box in every Wyoming Fish and Game office in the state.
No, they don't, but because what's funny about it is, the game wardens are great. Game wardens, they gave me an honorary citation a few years ago, and I do ride-alongs with game wardens around. And I know of a couple who keep a couple of Joe Pickett paperbacks in their trucks, so when they give somebody a ticket, they can ease the blow a little bit and say, here's a book for you. But the headquarters in Cheyenne doesn't love Joe Pickett as much as the game wardens do, because Joe Pickett's always at odds with the bureaucracy. And sometimes I exaggerate how nasty the bureaucracy can be. So they aren't quite as enthusiastic, so therefore no photos, I think.
Well, that's good. That means you're doing it right, I think.
We'll see.
Well, now Joe has a buddy in every book, and you get asked a lot about him. His name is Nate Romanowski, an outlaw falconer and with a special forces background, arguably one of the biggest badasses in modern literature. Now, Nate has some huge fans in the Yellow Dog office, and I'll take some serious grief if we don't talk just a bit about Nate and how his character originated.
Sure. Nate is, unlike Joe Pickett, unlike Joe Pickett, and I should say most of the characters in the book, Nate is actually based on a real person. A guy I grew up 1 year behind in high school in Casper, Wyoming, and he was a big guy. He was the middle linebacker on the football team, long blonde hair in a ponytail. He was a falconer, and he and I got to be friends, and I spent a lot of time, a lot of years, a lot of trips going on falconry hunting trips with him. And then he went off to the Air Force Academy and then to Special Forces and got involved in some things that he kind of tells me about. But the whole world of falconry I learned through him, and met a lot of other falconers and found out there's all of them have certain things in common, which are they're very idiosyncratic and very independent and stubborn, and they build their lives around falconry, and they have certain code and certain kind of fatalism about them, and some of them do get in trouble because they just live their own lives and don't want to be bothered by anybody. So the character of Nate is based on my friend, but also other falconers I've met. And many of the storylines, the falconry storylines that go throughout the books, have come from falconers themselves who, figure out how to get in touch with me, write me long emails, tell me stories about falconry and the problems they're having with the government or the state or whatever. And I'll incorporate some of that in the books.
Well, I'll tell you, he's a guy you definitely want in your corner if you're in trouble.
Absolutely. Yeah, he carries, at the time I brought him in the book as the third book, Winter Kill, and at that time I thought he's a bigger-than-life character. He needs a bigger-than-life weapon. And at the research I did at the time, it has since sort of changed. But at the time, the most powerful handgun in the world was considered to be the .454 Casull 5-shot revolver manufactured by Freedom Arms in Freedom, Wyoming. So that was perfect. Freedom Arms, Freedom, Wyoming. And I was able to go take a drive, met with the president of the company, shot the gun, learned all about it, and then from then on, Nate packed that gun until Freedom Arms built an even bigger one. That's a .50 caliber called a Wyoming Express. So Nate uses that from time to time too.
Those guys must love you at Freedom Arms.
I have sold them a lot of guns.
I bet you have.
You would think that they would give me one, but no, they have not.
Well, right there, I mean, we need to make a pitch for that. I think if anyone deserves one, it's CJ Box. Holy cow. Well, let me ask you this. You intersperse.
People stop by. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, please. Sorry, we're stepping on each other a little bit here. That's the joys of recording over the phone lines these days rather than in person. So please finish.
I was just going to say the president of the company there has told me that every year people stop from as far away from Germany at their little factory and buy the .454 Casull because they've read about it in the books.
They ask if Nate's been around lately?
Yes.
Well, that's good. Well, let me ask you this. So you intersperse fly fishing into a lot of your books and have over the years. And the cool thing is that it's done right. And what I mean by that is that so often when you read an excerpt from a novel that talks about or references fly fishing, if you're an angler, you read it and you think to yourself, well, that's completely wrong. How did the author not do their homework to make the fishing elements authentic and genuine? You ask yourself, do these people even fish or have they been fishing? And that's one thing I've always loved about your books. When you write about one of your characters who's on the water with a fly rod in hand, I mean, it's legit. It's correct and it's authentic.
Well, that's important to me, and I, there's a lot of like gun nuts out there who read these books and try to pick apart any kind of firearms, any kind of logistics that go to a firearm. And I have to admit, I'm kind of that way when it comes to fly fishing and when I read about it, especially in novels. And there's always a few tells where they got it wrong. Sometimes they'll say things like, "What kind of lure are you using?" Or I'll get my fishing pole and join you at the river. And so I'm really sensitive to that kind of thing and trying to get the terminology right and also the mindset of it. I love it, but I also know I think it's like golf. In a novel, if there's too much fly fishing, it turns off everybody but the most dedicated fly fishermen. Just like if there's a novel that has a bunch of golf in it, that's going to turn off everybody. So I just try to have enough and signal that Joe Pickett is a fly fisherman and an ethical one and enjoys it, and have him do things like, even in the middle of a murder investigation, as he's driving over a river, he notices that there's fish rising and he has to stop, look at them. And vow to come back later. And I think with a fly fisherman that resonates. With others, it probably doesn't.
Well, in your stories, you might have a character that is, say fishing from a drift boat or doing something completely different, riding horses in the backcountry, touring on the rodeo circuit, shooting all types of weapons, as you've just talked about, working with raptors, driving a semi, or even lying in a river, breathing through a straw, one of my all-time favorites. But, when you're writing about and creating these elements for your stories, are you actually doing all of these things as part of your research in order to get it right? I mean, are you out there making sure that, you're speaking from a first-person account with so many of these things?
I do. I think all those things you listed, I think the only thing I haven't done is lay in a river and breathe through a straw. But I've done all the other things, and I try to, if I'm going to write about it, I want to be able to do it kind of, from the inside out, because there's certain things, no matter how much research that you do, you can't render authentically unless you've done them. And there's other things you pick up by doing them that you never thought of. I remember being able to climb up to the top of a wind turbine in Wyoming on a windy day. And the reason I did that was because I needed to find out for the book I was writing if it would be possible to basically to lift a body all the way to the top and chain it to one of the turbine blades. Because that actually opens up a novel with a body flying around on one. And yes, it's possible. There's a chain and pulley system in those big turbine towers so that they can bring, equipment to the top. But what I didn't know is that the things actually sway in the wind when you're inside, and you're climbing up in the dark on a ladder and you're swaying back and forth in the wind. And that the wind, at least in my case, it was so strong when I got to the top and we threw open the cover that you had to buckle yourself onto little turnbuckles just to stand up, or it would blow you right off the top. So things like that, I couldn't put in the books unless I'd done them, because I don't know where else I would get that information.
Well, yeah, those wind turbines are huge. You don't realize how big they are until you're standing at the base of one, because you always see them from far off and they're dotting the hillsides and you think, okay, windmills, I get it. But those things are massive.
Yes, or how high you are when you get to the top. It's amazing.
Well, what are a couple of the other craziest or most surprising things you've done, aside from climbing wind turbines in a windstorm, that you've done in the name of literary research for your books?
Well, some of it's pretty fun. Like for a non-Joe Pickett book called Back of Beyond, I went and did a 5-day wilderness horseback trip into Yellowstone to kind of get the rhythm of it, and I learned a lot from the outfitter, and not so much wilderness stuff is like what group dynamics. If you have 7 or 8 people who've never met each other and they're all going on a forced, not forced, but on a trip together where they have to be with each other every minute. How do you deal with those personalities? I found that fascinating. Also, I get to do fun stuff, like for the most recent book, Long Range. They came out in March. I went to a company called Gunworks in Cody that manufactures ultra long range shooting rifles and optics. And their claim to fame is that, for the $11,000 or $12,000 it costs to buy one of their rifles, you can hit something at 1,500 yards right out of the box. And I was able to demonstrate that, and I was hitting targets I couldn't see with my naked eye. So by doing that, then I can translate that to the books.
Well, another thing is you're not afraid to incorporate controversial issues into your storylines and plots that oftentimes are very real issues here in the West. Things like the endangered species issues, public lands, oil and gas drilling, wind energy, of course, we just talked about that, mining, the rampant growth and development that we're seeing in a lot of these areas. But, you weave these issues into your stories, and it really adds so much more authenticity to your stories because you know your subject matter on that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's something that's always been really important to me, because I always thought, these kind of books are not just about the whodunit plot line. In my mind, they're also about a snapshot of the modern West at the time the book is written and what's going on. And I hope that, someday if somebody wanted to know kind of what it felt like to be in the Mountain West in 2020, they can pick up one of these books and get kind of an idea of what it was like, what people were talking about, what the issues were, and so on. But I also think it's very important. Sometimes I fail, but I try really hard when I introduce, controversial subjects, usually environmental, that I have both sides of the issue portrayed in the book. And that usually means an advocate on both sides explain their part, and I trust the reader just to kind of come down where they may without making them agenda books. But, I don't write the kind of books where all developers are bad and all environmentalists are good. And if somebody from business is introduced, that they're going to be behind the plot in the end. I think I read those kind of books and I get turned off by them really quickly because I think the author hasn't looked at the subject matter enough, or they have an agenda of their own that they want to hammer into your head. So I try to have both sides in there at least. Sometimes I'm not successful. Sometimes there are issues that are just pretty hard for the other side to defend on no matter what it is. And that's happened too. But generally I try to have, make it as balanced as possible.
Well, which comes through in the storylines, and it's not an easy thing because these are complex issues, out here in the West, for sure.
Right, and it goes to not only the books themselves, because I'll hear from people on both sides after they're written, but even I'm kind of required as an author to, do a certain amount of social media, and I like to post fishing pictures, and that's the only thing I post. I never do hunting. Anything like that, but I'll post a photo of me holding a big trout saying, this rainbow was caught and released on the North Platte River or something. And the comments will always say, that must have been good eating. Or, I hope you put it back. It's like, geez, come on, people. You read the whole thing.
Yeah, you can't just like the photo. You got to comment on it, right? You got to sound off. Well, let's get back to fishing. At one time, you actually worked as a fishing guide in Wyoming, and you've got a background in the industry.
I do. I was never a sophisticated fishing guide, I'll be honest with you. It was 35 years ago. It's when I was working as a newspaper reporter, and in the place I worked has a pretty vibrant, local fishing economy on the river. And there were a couple of the guides, when they had too many clients or big parties, they'd call me in to fill in. And at the time, there were very few fly fishermen. I mean, this was the last few years of the meat fishing almost. There were still people throwing minnows on minnow harnesses and all hardware on the river. And as I was kind of leaving this area was when there started to be an outcry about slot limits and fly fishing and catch and release. And it's been extremely successful. And so it's a whole different world now. But yeah, I was, I used to guide at a time where some fishermen would measure the day by how many six packs they drank, from when you launched the boat to when you pulled it out. Or that a trip was only successful if you ended up with your limit. So I've seen both sides of this, and I've, firmly come down on the side of, not keeping fish unless you're in the wilderness or you're going to eat them. And that it's a great sport, and that everybody should have the opportunity to catch big fish and release them.
Well, there you go. Well, growing up in Wyoming, how did you first find your way to fly fishing? Did you have someone who taught you? And how old were you when you kind of got turned on to not just the sport but the lifestyle of fly fishing?
I was probably 10 or 12, and it wasn't It wasn't like a stylistic choice or a moral choice or anything else. It was because we were went camping in the Bighorn Mountains, and I had an uncle who was catching more fish on grasshopper flies, more brookies on grasshopper flies than I could catch on real grasshoppers and worms. And I thought that, it was because he was more effective. And I thought it was so hard to cast the first time. And it took a lot of years to make the absolute transition between spin fishing and fly fishing. But probably I haven't used the spinning rod in 25 years now. And, now I've learned a lot and been able to not only fish the West, but through you guys, fished a lot of places around the world. And, I'm just passionate about it. It's my favorite sport.
Well, with your success over the years, you've been able to travel the world, and I want to talk about that in a minute and some of your favorite places. But do you still have a specific river or a fishery that you consider your home waters that are, still a favorite place and special for you for that connection?
Absolutely, and it's the Upper North Platte River. That's where I live. That's where our little ranch is. That's in southern Wyoming, and it's a free-flowing river, and I consider sort of my home water to go from the Colorado state line all the way up to include the Miracle Mile. And so I fished all the stretches of it, and I can see it from my house. And it's very challenging because it's not a tailwater. Every year I'm tracking the snowfall and how high is it going to be when is it going to finally drop? And, is there going to be enough water to last through August? Those kind of things. So it's really challenging, but it's really rewarding too, because I've had some of the best days of my life on that river when I hit it right. Also the Encampment River, which flows into it. And those are my favorites. Around the, other places, not trout fishing, I've got to say I love Baja because, catching Dorado on flies. And last time I went, I caught a 65-pound rooster fish on a fly that it just towed us out into the ocean. The one thing I don't think I want to do anymore is catch big tarpon. I caught my one big 95-pound tarpon, and I never want to do it again.
Yeah, they're a bit of work, aren't they?
Oh, man, I thought I was going to die. I was trying to hand the rod off to other people in the boat. Nobody would take it.
Well, you're getting around now. You're getting to travel and you're doing some saltwater fishing. How about flats fishing? Are you drawn to that as far as bonefish and permit goes? And
I have bonefished. I can't say I'm not as passionate about it as I am other kinds of fishing. I like it, and I'm really glad I have done it. But if I had to choose one or two places, I probably would not go bone fishing first. It's exciting when they get them, but I'm not crazy about looking at bonefish in my lap. I think they're ugly.
Oh, you're definitely going to get some comments about that from our listeners.
Oh, I know. But it's true. They're fun to catch, but not fun to hold or look at.
Well, how about future trips? Do you have a kind of a bucket list or any species that have caught your attention that you have yet to chase after, or anything that you're like, one of these days I'm going to go after that species, or I'm going to go visit that destination? Anything on your list?
You know what? I have never been steelhead fishing, and I feel really like I've missed something in my life. I want to do that. Golden Dorado is another one that I'd love to try. I have caught salmon, but I have not ever caught a salmon on the fly. So those are things I'd like to try.
Well, that's the cool thing is if it swims, there's a good chance it'll eat a fly, and so the list is always long, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. Well, I've got another fishing specific question for you. So it seems natural that Joe Pickett is going to be a trout guy, right? And he's likely a dry fly guy at that.
Right.
All right. Well, as for Nate, let's say that Nate got into fly fishing. Okay. What kind of fly angler would Nate Romanowski be? And what would be his favorite species and destination?
Oh, what a good question. That's something I've never thought of. He'd probably want to go after he'd probably want to go catch a tarpon and battle wills with it and maybe get it in the boat, or a marlin or something ridiculous like that.
We could picture that, or, just a sufferfest where he's out in, a blizzard steelhead fishing, with nothing but a t-shirt or something like that.
That's right. Yeah. If you recall, the only time Nate has been around a fish in the books is when he has one that he beats another man with, and then it freezes, and then he uses it as a club. So he hasn't really spent a lot of time on the water. He
hasn't found fly fishing the quiet sport. Hasn't really grabbed him yet. Well, I want to know, 20 books into the Joe Pickett series, I want to know that when you hit like Pickett book number 25 or 30, are we going to see Joe and Mary Beth like finally retire and say move to Belize where they can, calm down and manage a fishing lodge and relax a little bit? I mean, is he ever going to catch a break and just have things easy for him?
That's kind of a cool idea. A few years ago, I realized when I was working on a book, I thought all of a sudden it hit me. I don't know how old Joe Pickett is. And because the books happen in real time, I need to keep that very accurate. So I had to go back to open season, found a reference where he was 34, and then track each book. Because some happen a year from the last, some 6 months, some 4 months, some back-to-back, and realized at that point he was 49. So in this new book, the one I'm just finished today, I fished a new book today that you and I are talking. He's 51. So by the way it's kind of progressing, he's going to be around for a while still before he'd actually, need to retire. So I never think too far ahead. I've not thought of an end game yet. I'm just going to kind of take it as it goes.
Well, and I've got another question for you. Speaking of it, so he's 51 years old in the next book. In long range, I couldn't pick up what his badge number was at 20 books in. Have we figured that out, where he is in that lineup of Wyoming game wardens?
I had to go, do my research on that one too. It's now number 16.
Huh.
And for those listeners who don't understand what we're talking about, Wyoming has kind of a goofy system where there's 50 game wardens in the state of Wyoming, and there have been 50 for years. And the newest game warden hired is badge number 50. And as they grow in seniority, they get a new badge number, sometimes every year. So conceivably, Joe Pickett someday might be badge number 1. But he's not there yet, and he gets in trouble, and they take his badge away, and he has to start over sometime.
Yeah, he's been knocked back a couple times, I think.
Yeah, in this one, he's number 16.
That's good to know. Well, I'm glad he's moving up the food chain. He certainly deserves it. Do we have a name for the new book yet?
It's going to be called Dark Sky.
Nice, Dark Sky.
It's a book I'm really. I know we're talking about the next one. It won't be out till next March, but I really wanted to do a book where I stripped it down to the paint, and really made it an outdoor, isolated, kind of claustrophobic outdoor story with very few other elements in it, and kind of brutal. And because I haven't been traveling because of this pandemic, I finished the first draft of it much faster than I ever have before, and I'm really excited about it.
Well, we are too. I mean, Dark Skies next March. I can't wait. As we said, we're all addicted to these books, and it seems like we finish them about 3 days after they come out. So we'll be looking forward to that
great.
one.
Thank you.
Well,
and your name's in one of them. You've got to mention that.
Well, I was actually just about to ask you about that. Aside from the Joe Pickett series, you have 7 other books, including the Cassie Duel series, the second
Correct.
of which is titled Badlands. And there are a number of characters in that book who sound very familiar to some of us. Am I allowed to talk about that?
Sure, of course.
Well, I love the fact that when we read the book, you go through and it is a number of people that work at Yellow Dog Fly Fishing are featured in the book. Tom Melvin and Brian Gregson. I'm lucky enough to be included in that. But my business partner, Ian Davis, he has like the leading role in the book. I mean, he's an all-star.
Yeah, for no good reason other than just a name. You know what I do my writing process is, I do a long outline. I outline the characters, but I don't outline their names. And I'll just say character number 1, character number 2, character number 3. And then as I write the book, when I get to that point, then I'm in a desperate search for names to fill in. And I remember writing that book, and I remember I had a Yellow Dog catalog on my desk, and it was like four cops all on a big stakeout. And I just grabbed the catalog and went to the page with everybody's name on it and listed them on there. And I don't think I told you about it till the book came out. I don't think.
No, we didn't know until it came out. It was an awesome surprise.
Everybody dies or gets maimed, I believe, but that always happens.
Well, Ian loves to lord it over me. He's like, because I think my scene in the book is I'm a cop in the break room who's like hoarding the donut box, and Ian is this, kind of reckless ponytailed detective, and so he just lorded that over me for a whole year. Thankfully, until the next book came out, I beat him to the punch. I read it, and I just called him. I said, "Yeah, it does not end well for you in this next book. I got to tell you right now." So.
And absolutely none of it is personal. They're just names attached to characters.
Oh, no. I told him it was definitely personal, so that's perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well, that is so good. And we love working with you and being a small part of you fishing all over the world, and we look forward to more years of it. And I hope the next time you come up to Bozeman and do a book signing at the Country Bookseller that you'll spend an extra day and join us out on the river.
I would love to do that, and I can't tell you. I can tell you there's going to be a television series called The Big Sky that is based on all the Cassie Dewell novels, which are all set in Montana, and that they're going to start filming that in July in Montana. And I'm going to come up and visit the set at some point, and I believe that they're going to, if they stick to the book, it's going to be filmed kind of around Bozeman to Livingston. And if that happens, I'll get in touch with you, and love to stop by.
Well, that'd be great. You've got a lot of fans in the Yellow Dog office, and we'd love a chance to get you out on the water. CJ, this has been so great. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, it's been a pleasure for me, too. This is fun. I really wish most of these kind of interviews we could talk about fishing, and this is the only one ever in 20 years, so thank you.
Well, I will say to our listeners that if you are not yet a CJ Box reader, you need to do yourself a favor and just dive right in. With the Joe Pickett series alone, you have 20 books and an epic set of adventures that take place in some of the greatest places in the U.S. West. I would recommend that you start with the first book, Open Season, and go from there. You start at the beginning, and you will be completely hooked. And you can learn more about CJ and his work at cjbox.net. And, of course, find his books at pretty much every bookstore on the planet, I think. Well, that's it for this episode of Waypoints, the podcast that is 100% dedicated to travel, adventure, and exploration. Be sure to visit yellowdogflyfishing.com to plan and research your next fishing trip. Sign up for newsletters and new podcasts, and stay up to date on the latest travel news and developments. Join us for our next episode of Waypoints, and remember, life is short and no one ever regretted a life of adventure.
This has been another episode of Waypoints, the podcast of fly fishing travel and adventure angling. Thank you for joining us, and be sure to visit yellowdogflyfishing.com for more trip updates, travel news, expert advice, and adventure profiles.